About 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, I was in my early 20s, and I was living the classic dream of believing I was going to be famous someday. I was never a good student in school, and I was always known as the class clown. If there was one thing that I always did well as a kid, it was making my friends laugh. It was the only thing that gave me a real sense of purpose. So, instead of going to college, or getting a normal job right after high school, I decided that I was going to become a stand-up comedian. Spoiler alert, I did not become a famous comedian, which is honestly probably the best joke of my entire stand-up career. Instead, what I got was nearly a decade of bombing on stage in front of silent crowds. And even worse than that, the most terrifying single-handed experience of my life happened to me because of this pursuit. For a little bit of context, doing stand-up is incredibly hard, and it is definitely not lucrative when you are not successful. Not to mention, stand-up comedy was not nearly as popular back then as it is today. To say it is a grind is a massive understatement. You question every single decision you make every time you perform, until you finally get that one crowd that laughs at one of your jokes. The high you experience from the crowd laughing and cheering is intoxicating. It is like a drug, and I assume that is why comedians constantly keep grinding through the worst of times. Part of the grind is finding gigs that will pay you, or even just let you perform for a couple of minutes for exposure. I was fortunate enough to have several open mics in my hometown, but you are not getting paid at an open mic, and a lot of the time, you are sharing the stage with all sorts of other talented people, and not just comedians. Nothing kills a comedian's momentum quite like performing right after someone who just poured out their soul with life-altering, depressing poetry. After a few years of performing at these local open mics, I decided to try to reach out to club promoters and local comedians who actually got booked for real shows. Most of the time, these shows would be several hours away if I were lucky. Usually, they were even further than that. I managed to book a few shows, and this is where the grind gets incredibly real. It is also where my story takes a very terrifying turn. I did not have very good luck with these traveling shows. I was not getting paid, and I was driving 4 or 5 hours across state lines just for 5 minutes of exposure on a dim stage. It was not an ideal situation for someone who was completely broke and barely had any income coming in. One night, I had what seemed like an amazing opportunity to perform at a show that was being held 5 hours from where I lived. This show was actually a competition for comedians who were trying to break into the mainstream. The first place prize was $1,000, but the real prize for me was that several moderately famous comedians were going to be the judges of the show. It was my big chance to show actual comedians that I had real talent and deserved to be noticed. The worst part for me when I would make all these long trips was that I had a complete garbage car and an old cell phone that was about as reliable as those big 1980s brick cell phones. I would always think to myself that if something went wrong, I would be completely stranded. My drives almost always consisted of nothing but endless farmland and open fields as far as the eye could see. And because I was a lazy person, I did not bother to double-check my printed-out MapQuest directions before I left. Instead, I decided to just wing it, which is something I still regret to this day. And so, it did not take long before I was completely lost. The directions I had printed out did not match where I was at all. I had been on a backcountry road for some time, and I had absolutely no idea if I was even heading in the right direction. Thankfully, I always left for these traveling jobs very early, just in case I got lost. I may have been lazy, but I knew myself well, and getting lost was not uncommon for me. It was still daylight when I started driving through a small town. Honestly, calling it a small town might be a stretch. There were just a few beat-up old buildings and houses on a single street that was maybe a couple of 100 feet in length. Outside of an old, run-down gas station, there were a few individuals who looked less than welcoming. I know it is kind of rude to say, but they were dirty and mean, and they were incredibly rude to me. They did not look like they were using substances or anything like that. They just looked like they had been completely beaten up by life and did not want any outsiders around. I pulled up, asked where I was, and tried asking them if I was on the right track to get to my destination. They were extremely short with me, and after an awkward, tense back-and-forth exchange, they finally told me where I needed to go. According to these rude townspeople, I was still somewhat on the right track. Somehow, I had missed a turn a while back, but if I stayed straight on this road for a while, eventually I would see the road I needed to be on. I thanked them and went to fill up my tank before I set off again. While I was pumping the gas, I noticed that several of the people I had just talked to were staring at me. It was uncomfortable for sure. It was those dead-eyed, empty stares, and it was not just one of them. I counted at least 4 of them just staring and standing completely still like statues. It made me feel all sorts of weird. I finished pumping, ran inside to pay, and got out of that small town as fast as my garbage car could take me. I started driving and tried to shake off the bad vibes by rehearsing my comedy routine to myself out loud. I kept thinking about how ironically funny my conversation with the townspeople was, and I even tried thinking of ways that I could incorporate this weird experience into my stand-up routine later that night. But the problem was, the road was getting emptier and darker. Not long after leaving the town, a beat-up white pickup truck flew by me going very fast. I did not think anything of it at the time. I figured it was just a local who knew the roads well. When it was around dusk, I had been driving for nearly an hour since I left the town. There was absolutely nothing but dense trees on the left and right sides of the road. I had that bad gut feeling that I was probably lost again. As I continued down the road, I suddenly heard a loud, violent sound from underneath my car, and I immediately started losing control of the vehicle. I knew right away what had happened. It was unmistakable. I had somehow gotten a flat tire. I pulled over to the side of the dark road to inspect the damage. When I stepped out and looked down, I could not believe my eyes. It was not just a flat tire. Both of my front tires were completely obliterated. When I leaned over to take a closer look, I noticed that the rubber was impaled with several heavy-duty nails. It looked like someone had deliberately placed them there. I pulled out my terrible cell phone, and of course the service was non-existent. I tried calling a tow truck anyway, but I had no idea where I was or even what road I was on. I hung up the phone in frustration. Instead of panicking, I was actually starting to get angry that I was going to miss this important show. I was stupid, and my priorities were definitely in the wrong place. I decided to try to call one of my friends who might be able to look up my location. I described everything that I remembered about the drive, and I told him about the small town with the creepy gas station. He told me he was going to try to look up where I was, and that he would call me back as soon as he found anything. I did not know if I should just stay put in the car, or if I should try walking back in the direction of the town. I decided to stay put in the car because now that it was almost completely dark, it was starting to get very cold outside. It was clear now that I was not going to make the show, and my disappointment was turning into an eerie sense of dread. While I was waiting to hear back from my friend, I noticed 2 bright headlights popping out from the horizon far behind me. The headlights stopped moving a good distance from my car and did not continue in my direction. The car was close enough that the lights were incredibly bright and annoying, but far enough away that I could not tell what kind of car it was. I did not know if it was a cop or some local trying to call the police to report a disabled vehicle on the side of the road. If you are wondering why I did not just call the police myself, it is because I was driving a car that was not inspected or properly insured at the time, and I was not trying to get a massive ticket in another state. Several minutes went by, and the car behind me never moved. It just stayed parked a good distance behind me, shining those bright lights directly into my cabin. After probably a good 5 minutes or so, the bright lights started to get a little closer. The vehicle was slowly, deliberately moving towards the back of my car. As that was happening, 2 more lights suddenly appeared in front of me, making their way toward me very quickly. The loud vehicle in front of me stopped just inches from my bumper. Eventually, the car that was behind me parked directly behind my car, sandwiching me in the dark. I still could not tell who it was. While I was trying to adjust my eyes to the bright light in my rearview mirror, I noticed that the car doors from the vehicle in front of me were now opening. That is when I noticed it was a white pickup truck, the exact same beat-up white pickup truck that had flown past me earlier. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard a loud, violent bang on the driver's side window. I looked, and I could not believe my eyes. It was the rude man from the gas station. I started to panic because the man was aggressively trying to open my car door. Even though it was locked, he was pulling on the handle with incredible force. He started to beat on the car window with his fists. I was terrified, and I was not sure how long my window would last before it shattered. As this was going on, I noticed one of the other men from the truck make his way to the passenger side of my car. He also started to aggressively try to open the door, shaking the entire vehicle. I was trying to yell at them to stop, but it was like they did not even understand what I was saying. They were just grunting and smashing the doors. The guy at the driver's side door stopped trying to break in for a moment and instead just stood there, staring directly at me through the glass. It was just like those vacant, dead-eyed stares from the gas station earlier. I cannot even begin to explain how horrible that moment was. With absolutely no notice at all, he just started screaming. And it was not just a normal angry scream. He was howling and screaming at the top of his lungs like an animal. I do not know what came over me at that moment, but I decided that my best course of action was to just try and get out of the car and run. I unlocked the door and pushed it open as hard as I could, and thankfully, it was enough force to knock the screaming man backward onto the ground. I scrambled out and ran as fast as I could into the woods, but instead of running blindly into the pitch-black forest where I could easily get lost or hurt, I decided to dive to the ground only several feet into the brush, hiding under some thick leaves. I hoped that these guys would think I had run deeper into the woods and chase after me in that direction. And thankfully, that is exactly what happened. Moments later, I heard the heavy footsteps of several people running right past my hiding spot, shouting and cursing. When I was absolutely sure I heard all of them run deep into the trees, I quietly got up, shook off the dirt, and ran back to my car. Surprisingly, my backpack and my cell phone were still inside. I grabbed them, stayed low to the ground, and just ran as fast as I could down the road in the opposite direction. The entire time I was running, I expected them to jump out of the woods and grab me, but I never saw them again. About half an hour later, I was able to flag down a passing car. The woman driving was uncharacteristically kind. I do not know if I would have been so nice and trusting of a sweaty, screaming man running in the middle of nowhere in the dark. She called the authorities and even let me sit in her warm car until the police showed up. I told the cops everything, but as you might expect, there really was not anything they could do. There was no physical evidence of anything malicious other than some small dents on my car door, and given the overall terrible condition of my vehicle, the cops did not really believe the dents were caused by attackers. I also received a couple of expensive tickets for my car's lack of inspection and insurance, which was just the absolute icing on the cake for this story. I never found out why those people targeted me or what they wanted with me. Clearly, they were not trying to help. All things considered, I am incredibly lucky that I am here today telling this story. All I can say is, just be careful out there. You never know what people are capable of, especially when there is no one around to witness it. And then, there is the story of what happened to my two friends and me last summer. I feel like I am still not right from that experience. What was supposed to be an awesome, spontaneous girls' road trip turned into a living nightmare that I am not sure I will ever fully get over. For a little bit of context, I am not a spontaneous person at all. I am one of those people who has to have every single thing planned out very far in advance. Every little detail needs to be accounted for, from the hotels to the exact rest stops. It is annoying for some of my friends, but it is just how I operate to keep my anxiety in check. But in late June, I broke up with my boyfriend, whom I had been dating for 5 years at that point. It was an incredibly messy, painful breakup. One of the only things that got me through those first few weeks was that my friend, Sarah, had just dumped her boyfriend as well. Having someone to spend time with who was also going through the exact same emotional situation was such a blessing. Strangely, our bonding through misery and grief helped us both to slowly move on. A few weeks after the breakups, our other friend, Alyssa, invited Sarah and me on this massive cross-country road trip she was going to be taking. Ordinarily, I would never do something like that. The sheer anxiety of not having a plan would be enough for me to melt away. But for some reason, this time, a girls' trip sounded exactly like what I needed to clear my head. All three of us are fortunate enough to have jobs where we can easily take time off for a trip like this. Alyssa basically lives on the road. She is always traveling and finding these insane, off-the-beaten-path places all over the country. She is the type of woman who will just throw a sleeping bag down in the dirt and sleep under the stars without a care in the world. She has always been such a free spirit and lives entirely for adventure. Sarah and I, on the other hand, were much more sheltered. So, we decided to let Alyssa basically be the captain of our little crew for this trip. She planned a rough route, and we were just along for the ride. The first day or so of the trip was a little rough for me. I just was not used to winging it and not knowing where we were going to sleep each night. But after a while, I started really enjoying myself and letting go of my control issues. On the second or third day, we drove by this insane-looking massive barn. It was definitely abandoned. There was no sign of human life anywhere near it. The surrounding farm looked like it had been completely overgrown by nature over several decades. Alyssa was begging us to let her pull over and go inside to explore, but I was not feeling it. Alyssa was adamant that clearly nobody lived there and it was safe. She was obviously correct about the abandonment, but I just could not bring myself to trespass on private property. It is also worth noting that I am just a huge baby. Not wanting to trespass was my convenient excuse, but I was actually terrified of someone squatting inside that dark barn. I had listened to one too many true crime podcasts, and I was not about to get kidnapped by some insane backwoods farm man. After a few minutes of playful arguing, Alyssa gave up, and we decided to keep moving on with our trip. But the problem was, Alyssa could not let it go. Over the next week of traveling, which was otherwise amazing, Alyssa kept bringing up that barn. We went sightseeing all over the countryside, partied in small-town bars, slept on a beautiful mountain, and met awesome people. It really was incredible, but it seemed like any time Alyssa could work that abandoned barn into the conversation, she did. Eventually, while we were driving back towards civilization, Alyssa basically begged us to go back and get a closer look at the barn. I do not know if it was the trip that had made me come out of my shell a little bit, or just days of Alyssa slowly breaking us down, but I was starting to warm up to the idea. I told her that if we got there, and it looked like absolutely nobody had been there in years, then we could quickly check it out. I was confident that most likely nobody was there, but I wanted to be safe. I was not even 100% sure that Alyssa could get us back there, since we had driven so far. But that girl is amazing with directions. She knew exactly how to get back to the overgrown property. We spotted the barn around 4:30 in the afternoon. We drove our SUV off the main road onto the dirt and grass, parking it several yards away from the barn. We did not want to park right on top of the place, just in case some scary person was indeed living inside. Alyssa was like a kid on Christmas morning. She ran to the barn door first, pushing it open. It was crazy inside that place. The barn was ancient, and I am pretty sure the thick vines wrapping around the beams were the only things holding the building up. It almost sounded like the place was breathing, but I am pretty sure that was just the integrity of the wooden structure slowly falling apart in the wind. The weirdest part was all this strange equipment that was still sitting inside the barn. It did not look like any modern farm equipment I had ever seen before, but I am not a farmer, so maybe it was just very old stuff. Honestly, it looked like devices you would expect to find in a medieval dungeon. After we explored the barn and took a bunch of pictures, Alyssa wanted us to check out the old farmhouse that was connected to the property. At this point, I was fully invested in the adventure, so she did not get any pushback from me. We had to physically kick down the front door of the house because it was warped into the frame and would not open. Inside the farmhouse, it was both creepy and deeply sad. It was completely empty and abandoned. It is not like the previous owners had left furniture or personal items behind. The rooms were entirely barren, other than a single small green table and a matching green wooden chair sitting in the middle of the living room. What was sad was that I could not stop thinking about the families who had most likely lived there before. I mean, it was a working farm at one point. Somebody had to have built this place and loved it, and now it was just forgotten by history, rotting away. We explored the upper levels, and I tried to imagine how cute the house must have been at one point. After a while of just hanging out and talking inside the small, dusty house, Alyssa and Sarah both made a crazy suggestion. They suggested that we actually stay inside the farmhouse that night, instead of finding a hotel or sleeping in our tents. Obviously, looking back, this was a horrible, foolish idea. But at that moment, surrounded by my friends and feeling adventurous, it seemed wild and exciting. We had been hanging out there for so long already that I did not even realize it was almost 7 in the evening. We went back to the SUV, grabbed our sleeping bags and supplies, and brought them inside. We ate some sandwiches from our cooler, drank a few beers, and laughed about the trip. Around 9, we started setting up our sleeping bags on the floor of the empty living room. We all set our phone alarms for 6 in the morning so we could get right back on the road. We were all completely exhausted from the days of driving, so it did not take us long to pass out. But as I mentioned, I am an incredibly light sleeper. I was tossing and turning for a while, going in and out of consciousness. I must have finally fallen asleep briefly because around 3 in the morning, something strange woke me up. I swear I thought I heard someone make a sharp, quiet shushing sound right inside the room. I slowly rose from my sleeping bag and scanned the dark room the best I could, with only the moonlight faintly shining through the vines on the window. I did not see or hear anything else. My best guess at the time was that either Alyssa or Sarah had just made a sound in their sleep. I laid back down and shut my eyes, trying to calm my racing heart. But almost instantly, I jumped right back up because there was a loud, violent bang at the front door. It was like someone had crashed directly into the door. And remember, we had to kick the door down earlier, so it was basically just propped up loosely against the frame. If this really was a person outside, they could easily just push the door down and walk in. The bang on the door was so loud that it immediately woke up Alyssa and Sarah. Both of them were just as startled as I was. We all sat there frozen on the floor holding our breath, listening intently for another sound. But instead of another loud bang, we suddenly started to hear these soft, delicate, rhythmic taps coming from the window on the other side of the room. Then, the violent banging on the door started up again. This was not the wind, and it was not the creaking of an old barn. This was for sure people who clearly knew we were inside. We all huddled up together on our sleeping bags, panicking. It is easy to say what you would do in a situation like this, but I promise you, in the moment, you would probably be completely paralyzed with fear as well. The banging on the front door suddenly stopped, and then the heavy wooden door was violently pushed open, crashing to the floor. 3 figures walked inside. It was 2 skinny men and 1 skinny woman. I would say all of them were maybe in their late 30s. They did not rush in screaming or doing anything insane. Instead, they just slowly, deliberately walked in and stood in a line right in front of us. Somehow, the fact that they walked in so calmly and normally was infinitely scarier than if they had rushed us. Sarah started to scream in absolute terror, and in response to Sarah's screaming, one of the men suddenly started screaming back at her. It was like he was mocking her, mirroring her screams pitch for pitch. The woman in the group started to make that sharp shushing sound at Sarah, waving her finger. The man in the middle of the group then started to make strange, exaggerated gestures with his hands, almost like a mime. I did not even realize until that exact moment that all 3 of them were holding weird masks, which they slowly put over their faces after the man was done gesturing. The masks were incredibly bizarre. I have never seen anything like them before or since. The guy in the middle put on a mask that was literally just a giant purple cube, that is it. No face, no features, just a solid purple cube. The other man, the one who had been mirroring Sarah's screams, put on a mask that looked like a homemade Batman mask, made out of dirty cardboard. And the woman put on what looked like a standard blue medical mask, but it had plastic holiday icicles hanging off each side of it, looking like weird artificial tusks. They slowly started creeping closer to us, taking tiny steps. The more we panicked and cried, the louder and more irritated they became. As we screamed, they started to scream back at us. Suddenly, the woman lunged forward and grabbed my shoulders. Because she was so skinny, adrenaline kicked in, and I was able to violently push her down onto the dusty floor. This sudden distraction caused the 2 masked men to stop and look down at the fallen woman. The guy with the purple cube mask shouted at me, telling me that I was going to pay for doing that. At that exact moment, Sarah remembered she had a small can of pepper spray on her keychain. She grabbed it and started spraying wildly in the direction of the masked people. The harsh chemical cloud gave us just enough of a window to scramble past them toward the exit. The woman on the floor reached out and grabbed my ankle as I ran past, but I was able to kick myself free quickly. As I was running through the broken doorway, I looked back over my shoulder and saw the woman reaching behind her into her waistband. I ran to our SUV as fast as my legs could carry me. I did not want to wait around and find out what weapon she was reaching for. We could still hear them screaming at the top of their lungs from inside the farmhouse, but for some reason, they did not chase us out to the car. I remember my vision being blurry and my throat burning from the pepper spray that must have been lingering in the air as we fled. We scrambled into the SUV, Alyssa started the engine, and we drove away as fast as possible, making it back to our home state in record time. We did not actually report this to the police, because we figured we were the ones who had technically trespassed on private property, and for all we knew, those weird people could have been the actual owners of the land, though I seriously doubt that. One of the scariest parts of this whole ordeal, for me at least, is that we have absolutely no idea where those people came from. They just suddenly appeared in the middle of the night. We had thoroughly explored that entire barn and house that afternoon, and there was absolutely no sign of life, no food, no sleeping bags, no fresh footprints in the dust, no other cars, nothing. Those deranged, mask-wearing lunatics just showed up out of the darkness with the sole purpose of terrorizing and harming us. I am still dealing with the mental scars from that trip. I am happy I got that adventurous girls' trip out of my system, but I am perfectly fine if I never go on another cross-country trip again. I will gladly settle for a nice, quiet staycation next time, but the most chilling story of all is what happened to my girlfriend and me a few years ago. We decided to take a scenic road trip across the United States. This trip was supposed to be the most important and special trip of our lives, because it was the trip where I planned to propose to her. She is now my wife, but unfortunately, my proposal is not the only reason this trip is so memorable. One of the happiest memories of my entire life is also permanently plagued by an event that nearly ended both of our lives in the middle of nowhere. For a little bit of backstory, I drive a large truck with a very spacious cargo bed. It was more than big enough for her and me to comfortably lie down on a thick air mattress that I had set up in the back. We spent our days hiking through beautiful trails across the country, and when night fell, we would park and sleep in designated camping areas right in the back of my truck. I had gone camping a few times as a kid with my family, and I always absolutely hated the process of setting up tents and sleeping on the hard ground. Sleeping in the comfort of my truck bed felt like a perfect hybrid version of camping, and we both really loved it. We both love the outdoors, but we would be the first to admit that we are not exactly survival experts. For the first part of the trip, every single night was beautiful. We were incredibly lucky when it came to the weather. Every night we would fall asleep staring up at the clear night sky. If you have never gazed at the stars in the deep wilderness without any light pollution, you really need to do that. But one of the few downfalls of the trip was that my girlfriend was the absolute lightest of light sleepers. Every single tiny sound woke her up, and since we were out in nature, that meant every gust of wind, every bird rustling in the branches, and every small animal moving through the brush caused her to sit up in panic. I would always offer her sleep aid medicine to help her rest, but she would always refuse. She said it would make her wake up feeling groggy, which she apparently disliked more than being half awake all night. But it was not just being a light sleeper that kept her awake on this trip. She also has a crippling, intense fear of bears. Ever since one of her coworkers told her a horrific story about how her family was attacked by bears on a camping trip, my girlfriend had been on high alert. Every noise she heard outside the truck, she immediately assumed was a bear coming to get us. And then, we reached the night that was almost our last night on Earth. About 3/4 of the way through our trip, I finally found the perfect scenic overlook, got down on one knee and proposed. She said yes immediately. It was easily one of the happiest, most emotional days of my life. With the immense stress of the proposal finally out of the way, I slept like an absolute baby that night in the back of the truck. But the next morning, I woke up to find my new fiancée looking incredibly pale and exhausted. She was the most tired she had been on the entire trip. When I asked her if she had been scared of the nature noises again, she kind of paused and did not answer me right away. This was very weird behavior for her, as she was usually very vocal about her fears. After a moment, she looked at me and told me that she had woken up in the middle of the night because she swore she could hear someone walking slowly around the outside of our truck. She said she stayed lying flat down on the air mattress so she would not be seen, but she was absolutely convinced that someone was pacing just inches away from the truck bed. Every time she tried to close her eyes, she could hear the distinct sound of footsteps in the dirt, and she was even sure she heard quiet mumbling or whispering at one point. I did believe her, or at least, I believed that she sincerely thought she heard those things. I was not dismissive, but I tried to reassure her, thinking it was probably just a deer or another camper. I was pretty sure we were not actually being stalked, but before we left the campsite that morning, my fiancée suddenly gasped as she stepped out of the truck. When I ran over to see what was wrong, she pointed down at the damp dirt right next to the driver's side tire. There, clearly printed in the soil, was what looked like a small footprint. I was probably being ignorant and trying to keep her calm, so I told her it was a stretch to call it a human footprint. I asked if it could have possibly been her own footprint from the night before, but she instantly protested, saying she had not stepped foot on that side of the truck. I did not argue with her because I could tell she was genuinely terrified. I made sure I thoroughly checked the entire truck before we left, opening the cab and checking under the chassis to confirm we did not have some crazy hitchhiker. While checking the back seat of the cab, I did find something slightly odd. My personal travel planner was sitting on the seat, and it was open to the exact page where I had written down our detailed itinerary, listing the specific spots where we planned to stop and camp each night. I did not think much of it at the time. I figured my fiancée had just been looking at it to check our route, or maybe I had left it open myself. I put it back in my bag, locked the cab, and we hit the road. It took a little while for her to get out of her morning fog, but after we stopped for a large coffee, she started feeling like herself again, and did not bring up the creepy footprints or the whispering for the rest of the day. We spent the day being obnoxiously in love, hiking through some beautiful mountain trails, but as night began to approach, we had to find our next camping spot. As we set up our little air mattress nook in the truck bed, I could tell she was starting to get uneasy again. It was not the fear of bears that was freaking her out tonight. It was the possibility of another person lurking outside our truck. I told her that we did not have to sleep in the open truck bed. I offered to let us sleep inside the locked cab of the truck, or we could even drive to the nearest town and find a hotel. But she insisted that we stay in the truck bed, since it was our very last night in the wilderness, and she did not want to ruin the experience. I decided that I would stay awake for the first few hours of the night to make sure she fell asleep safely. It took her a long time to relax, but she finally passed out around midnight. I had dug out my old portable DVD player from high school and thrown on an old season of a comedy show, just to give her some comforting background noise to drown out the silence of the woods. The once beautiful silence of nature was now something she was terrified of. Once she was deeply asleep, I shut off the DVD player, rolled over, and tried to get some sleep myself. But before I could even doze off, I suddenly heard a distinct rustling sound right outside my truck. My first instinct was that it was a small bear or a raccoon because the rustling sounded a bit too heavy to be a bird. I knew it was imperative not to startle my fiancée and cause a massive panic. Slowly and as quietly as I could, I crawled to the edge of the truck bed and peered over the side. I could not believe my eyes. There was a person slowly walking around the front of my truck. It was a smaller, slender figure wearing a dark hood, and they were quietly mumbling something to themselves. I quickly ducked back down into the truck bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. Thankfully, they had been walking in the opposite direction and had not seen me peer over. At this point, I did not know if I should wake up my fiancée. I was worried that waking her would make too much noise and alert the intruder. Right now, my main goal was to make as little noise as possible. I thought about trying to jump out and tackle the person, since they looked a lot smaller than me. But the problem was, I did not know if they were armed with a weapon, or if there was someone else hiding in the dark woods ready to jump me the moment I left the truck. Keeping my fiancée safe was my absolute #1 priority. I lay there, listening intently as the footsteps circled the vehicle. The figure made her way around the passenger side and walked right past the foot of the truck bed. I carefully angled my head to get another look through the gap in the tailgate. I still could not see her face under the hood, but I could clearly tell it was a woman. I could see long blonde hair spilling out from the bottom of the hood, and I could hear her mumbling more clearly now. The voice was unmistakably female, whispering incoherently. I decided that the next time she passed by the front of the truck, I would jump out and confront her. I was somewhat relieved that my fiancée was still asleep through all of this. I waited for several agonizing seconds, but the woman never made her way back around to my side. I slowly leaned over the edge of the truck again, but I did not see her on my side or near the front of the truck. That meant she had either fled back into the woods, or she was standing on the other side of the truck where I could not see her. As fast as I could, I pulled out my cell phone, opened a blank note, and typed out a message in large letters. "Do not make a sound. Someone is standing right outside the truck. I am going to jump out and distract them. You need to grab the keys, start the truck, and I will jump back into the bed." I quietly shook my fiancée awake, keeping my hand gently over her mouth to prevent her from crying out. I held up the glowing phone screen for her to read. I could see the absolute terror and confusion in her eyes, but thankfully, she understood the gravity of the situation and did not make a single sound. As quietly as possible, I pressed the truck keys into her hand. I grabbed my small pocket knife from my pocket, took a deep breath, and vaulted over the side of the truck bed, aiming to scare the intruder away. But when my feet hit the dirt, the space around the truck was completely empty. I lowered my guard for just a fraction of a second, completely confused. In that moment of silence, my fiancée anxiously called out from the truck cab, asking if everything was okay. Just as I was about to open my mouth to answer her, an intense, blinding pain shattered my left ankle. The woman had been hiding completely flat underneath the truck. While I was standing there looking around, she had reached out from under the chassis and violently smashed my ankle with a thick, heavy tree branch. I stumbled and crashed to the ground. As I was struggling to pull myself back up, the woman crawled out from under the truck, screaming erratically at the top of her lungs. She threw the heavy wooden branch directly at my head. I threw my arms up in self-defense, blocking the blow. That is when she reached into her pocket and pulled out a large silver kitchen knife. She began to swing it around crazily, slashing the air in front of my face. I desperately scrambled backward on the dirt, trying to keep out of reach of her wild, erratic movements. Once I felt like I had backed up far enough to give us some space, I screamed to my fiancée to start the truck immediately. My fiancée bravely jumped from the truck bed, scrambled into the driver's seat, and turned the key. The engine roared to life. Hearing the noise, the crazy woman immediately diverted her attention away from me and started sprinting directly toward the driver's side door where my fiancée was. But we had backed up far enough that my fiancée had time to react. She slammed the truck into drive and accelerated, kicking up a massive cloud of dust as she drove a short distance away. The hooded woman stopped and began to scream in a way that sounded almost like she was crying. My fiancée drove a few yards, quickly spun the truck around, and drove straight back in the direction of the crazy woman to scare her off. The woman was forced to dive out of the way into the dirt to avoid being hit. As she fell, her hood was knocked back off her head, and the headlights of the truck illuminated her face perfectly. I froze. It was my ex-girlfriend. She had struggled with severe mental health issues when we were younger. But the last I had heard, she was supposed to be doing well and living in another state. I could not believe what I was seeing. Our breakup years ago had been incredibly toxic and messy. I actually had to get the law involved at one point, because she would constantly stalk around the outside of my house in the middle of the night, claiming to the police that her only crime was being desperately in love with me. But that was over 6 years ago. It was not like this was a fresh, recent breakup. She had carried this obsession across years and miles. Once her hood was off, and she realized she had been recognized, she fell to her knees in the dirt and began to sob uncontrollably. The old empathetic version of myself would have wanted to go over to her to make sure she was okay and get her help, but not after she had just tried to stab me. This woman was dangerous, and I was not going to take any more chances with our lives. My fiancée quickly drove the truck up to where I was standing. I threw open the passenger door, scrambled inside, and we sped away into the night. My ex-girlfriend did not even attempt to chase after us. She just sat there in the dirt, shrinking in our rearview mirror. As soon as we were able to get cell service, I called the police and reported the entire horrific encounter. The most surprising part of the whole thing was that she eventually just traveled back to her home state a few days later, where the local police were waiting to confront her. To her credit, she did not deny a single thing. She openly told the investigators that she wanted to be locked up because she knew she was not well. She admitted that she had stolen my travel planner weeks prior to get our exact route, and she confessed that her ultimate goal was to kill my new fiancé, so we could never be together. When the detectives asked her if she had also intended to harm me, she apparently just broke down and cried. The last official update I ever received about her was that she was committed to a long-term psychiatric institution, but I am not entirely sure how long she was sentenced to stay there. It has been a few years now, and nothing else has happened. I rarely allow myself to think about that terrifying night, but whenever I hear true crime stories about stalkers, I am instantly reminded of that horrible experience. It constantly makes me wonder if she is still locked away, or if I will ever see her standing in the shadows of my driveway again. My wife still nervously looks up her name on Facebook and other social media platforms all the time, trying to make sure she is still institutionalized. But as of right now, she is completely off the grid, and I desperately hope she remains that way for the rest of my life. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought of today's episode in the comments. And remember, we have a whole playlist of true crime episodes ready for you to binge right now. Until next time, see ya.